Hello. In the previous YouTube video, I talked about the DOM, how to get elements out of the DOM, and then how to change the text. This time we're going to build on that, and instead of changing the text automatically, we're going to wait until a click has happened, or a click on the element has happened, and then we'll change the text. So to give you an example of what this will look like, here is the page right here. When we click on this, it'll change. If we refresh the page, nothing happens, but when we click, the text changes. So this is a little bit different than last time. We're not automatically changing the text, we're waiting till a click happens. So let's look at our code. That's the finished copy. I'll erase that. And now here is our starting HTML. The most important things here are the paragraph element, which we will be changing, which we will also be clicking, and that is here on line 12, and the line that brings in the JavaScript file, which is currently blank. So here's what we're starting with. We've got the HTML page and the JavaScript file. Now let's get them to work together. Just like last time, we're going to have to start by getting the element. So if we think through the problem we're trying to solve, is we have an element on the page, a paragraph, and we want to be able to know when it's clicked. Well, if we want to be able to know that it's clicked, first we're going to have to do is we're going to have to grab the paragraph and then tell it, hey, you, tell me when you are clicked. So just like last time, we're going to start with getting the paragraph. So we'll start with, once again, talking to the DOM. The DOM is in a variable called document. We can get to specific things in the DOM by using the query selector. Specifically, this function will return the first thing we query for that matches the selector we pass in. So we're going to pass in a CSS selector as a string, and so if we look back at the page, our paragraph had a class of the paragraph, so we will take that class, put it here as the selector, and we will put a period at the beginning because this is selecting for a class, a CSS class. So this will get us the element, but we can't do anything with it unless we put it in a variable or something. So let's start with that. So that gets the element, this puts it in a variable. We will call it, in this case, the paragraph. So this variable holds the element. It doesn't hold the text of the element, which is click me. It holds the entire element, the whole thing. Let's see that in action. Let's console log the paragraph and see what we find in the browser. So there it is. Not just click me, it gets the whole element. The whole thing is there. Now one thing that you'll find whenever you use the Chrome DevTools is whenever you refresh the page, and every time this thing is changing at the bottom, I'm refreshing the page. Every time you refresh the page, it's going to change its view, it seems, of the element that you have. So in this case, right now, we see the text of it, but here we see it as a DOM element that we can open up and explore and see aspects of it. So you're not getting the text out of the DOM element with this query selector, you're getting the DOM element itself. It's very important to understand. So now that we have the paragraph, what we need to do is we need to know when somebody clicks on that paragraph. So how do you do that? Well, in HTML world and DOM world, we call these things that happen to elements, we call these things events. Events can be things like click. So when you click, if you click an element, that's a click event. If you mouse over an element, assuming you're using a device with a mouse, that's a mouse over event. The window itself has scroll events, so you can know when someone scrolls the browser window. If you're on a mobile device, like an iPhone or an Android, DOM elements support various touch events. And so the programmer can pay attention to when somebody touches an element. It's similar to a click, but a bit different. But that's a discussion for another time. So you have events in browsers where you can say, okay, whenever events happen, I want you to do a thing. And they have something on the DOM API. So we have a paragraph, which this is a DOM element. So therefore, as a part of this DOM element, we get a function, a very useful function, called addEventListener. So we can type in the paragraph, then a period, then addEventListener. This function takes 2 arguments. The first thing you pass in is the event, because it could be click, mouse over, touch, various things. So the first thing is the event. The second thing is the thing that the function that will fire when the event is triggered. That would be a good word for it, when the event is triggered. So we can say click. In this case, that's what we want. When the element is clicked, we want something to happen. That means we need to then pass a listener. If we want to, we can put in an anonymous function here and write our code. In our case, what I want to do is create another function. We can say, call it function. We can call it anything we want. But we can call it the paragraph clicked. So this is a function that gets called when a paragraph or when the paragraph is clicked. So there's our function, console.log. Let's see if this event fires for us. So now we pass in this function right here. Okay. So now let's read the code and let's see what might happen. So first thing, we go to the DOM. We try to select something out of the DOM. Assuming we find it, the paragraph will have something in it, this variable. Then we console log that variable to see if we have anything in it, and we already checked that we do, so that is just fine. Next, we define a function for lines 5 through 7, and right now that function will only console log clicked, so we can see when we're clicking, but we haven't done anything else. And next, we have on line 9, we are adding an event listener to the paragraph. So if you read this, it's on the paragraph, add an event listener. This is the event. This is the listener. This can be a named function, as we're doing here. This can be an anonymous function. Doesn't matter. Either way you want to do it. So we're adding an event listener, and let's see if that works. So I will now refresh the page because I have changed my JavaScript. I will come back here and click. Now the text didn't change because we haven't implemented that yet, but notice what did work. Now our function, sometimes called a callback function, our function fired whenever we clicked the DOM element. This is me clicking it, and that number beside clicked is Chrome's way of saying, yes, you're still clicking on that element 14, 15 times. So that is working, and that's fantastic. So back here, we need to change the text of the paragraph. We can change it to anything we want. I will change it to the paragraph.text content equals I love delicious barbecue, because that is true. Now with that change, I probably don't need the clicked console log, so we can go back, refresh the page, and see what happens. Hey, look at that. Our text changed to I love delicious barbecue. Now if we keep selecting this by clicking it, the event is still firing. Because I removed the console log, we don't see it. The text keeps getting changed, but it keeps getting changed to the same thing it was before. So it doesn't look like it's continuing to fire, but it actually is. So this is a working implementation. Now sometimes people will ask, the paragraph clicked, should it be just the name of it, or should it be like this? Because normally when people call functions, if you've done much JavaScript, you know that you will call them with the parentheses. It's a good question. But that's actually not the way you do it. And here's why. My analogy for this is, let's assume the function is a gun. When you want to call the function, like this, that's firing the gun. Okay? So if we were to have this in the code, is at the end of this block of JavaScript, whenever the browser was done reading it, it would call the function, it would fire the gun, and the paragraph would immediately change its text. So let's go ahead and do that. Now it's not waiting for the click event, it's just doing it, because I'm firing the gun. And that's exactly what we would get if we go here and put the parentheses. Because whenever you add addEventListener here, if the parentheses are here, it's not giving the addEventListener the function to call, it's actually calling the function. So now, if we refresh, it continues to change to I love delicious barbecue. But we don't want it to do that. We want to get rid of those parentheses and then wait for it to click. So if the function is a gun, what we want to make sure is we don't want the gun to fire until the click event happens. So we hand the gun to the event listener. When you hand someone a gun, do you pull the trigger as you're handing it to them? No, you don't. You hand them the gun without pulling the trigger, and then when they feel like they need to pull the trigger, then they will do so. That's what's happening here. We are handing the function to addEventListener. That doesn't mean we're firing the function. We're waiting. We're waiting for the click to happen. And when the click happens, then the function will fire and change our text content. Okay, so let's start from the top of the JavaScript file and read through it now that we're finished, just to make sure we understand everything. We start on line 1. We start with talking to the DOM and saying, hey DOM, I would like to run a query to select something. And that's what this function does. And the selector we're going to use is the -paragraph. It is a class selector because of the dot, and that is specifically looking for this paragraph right here, paragraph with a class of the paragraph. So this part of that line grabs the paragraph, the DOM element itself, doesn't necessarily do anything with it until this side of the line where we put the paragraph in the variable. So on line 3, we console log the paragraph to make sure we got it. I frequently put in console logs just as sanity checks to make sure I didn't misspell something and miss my element, exactly what I did here. So the paragraph is in that variable. And then I'm defining a function on lines 5 through 7. I'm not calling a function. This just defines a function. This is like, going back to our analogy, building the gun. We're not firing the gun on lines 5 through 7. We are simply building the gun. And so on line 9, we're grabbing that paragraph that's in the variable, and we're adding an event listener to the paragraph. The event being click. And so whenever someone clicks the paragraph, this function is listening, and so it will fire. So when the page loads, it's going to go through all these lines. It's not going to fire the function paragraph clicked. The text will not change. It's just handing the function to the element as a listener for the click event. And then whenever someone comes in and clicks the paragraph, it then will run the function. And then line 6 happens. We have the paragraph. We change its text content to I love delicious barbecue. Now there's some common errors that might happen when you do something like this. We saw one of them last time. If you misspell a selector, we can come back, try to load, and this, well, we didn't get a paragraph back. It was null. There was nothing there. And so therefore, when we tried to add event listener on a null, the browser complained because that doesn't make any sense. And that's correct. So let's fix that. Another thing, if you misspell your event, let's refresh. We can go and click, and nothing's going to happen. This is one of those unfortunate cases where you think you've done it right, and you're angry at the browser because it's not giving you an error and it's not working, and you're like, I did this correctly, why isn't it working? This browser's horrible, it's non-functional, when actually it's our problem. Misspelling, right there. Okay? Go back, still works, we're good. Another common error, at least for me, I frequently misspell text content as text context. Maybe this is just unique to me. But if you misspell this property, you won't see anything. You will click, and once again, you don't get an error. Because as far as JavaScript is concerned, that's actually not an error. You can assign arbitrary values to arbitrary properties on objects in JavaScript. It's fine. It's not an error. Well, it is an error, at least in terms of our intent. And so you have to look for those pesky misspellings, whether they're selectors or properties or events. But now it's working, and that makes me happy. So that's it for this time. Next time we'll do more fun DOM manipulation and more fun JavaScript.